Hello, welcome to the Writing Centrifuge. Today there will be spoilers for Chainsaw Man Manga Part 1, Chapters 1 through 97, Chainsaw Man the anime adaptation as of today, January 5th, Hunter x Hunter anime adaptation from 2013, the Naruto anime adaptation, and the Jujutsu Kaisen anime adaptation as of today, January 5th. Tatsuki Fujimoto will officially go down as one of my all-time favorite writers. His work on Chainsaw Man alone earned him a Golden Globe, the Piston Cup, an Olympic medal, and of course, a Nobel Prize. To actually get to the point, Aki is a very interesting character. Although he isn't my favorite, and at first I didn't really get it, Aki eventually became a character that I could root for, and a character worth investing in, and then having a snowball pierce my heart. This video will be straightforward, much like Aki himself. I'll start with the introduction to the story, then his past, then his future, or in other words, what ends up happening throughout part 1, and lastly, Aki is introduced as sort of a fun sucker in the anime. The major difference that changes that from the manga is that this thing doesn't appear, which means that the anime purposely had Aki be the first drop of rain on Denji's parade, since it meant he couldn't work with Makima right away. In the manga, Aki kinda seemed like just another character, but he also was super judgmental of Denji and dismissed him pretty quickly, which the anime used to great effect by making him seem more like a bummer, which I think works well with the character. Aki takes Denji to an alley, and they have a nice talk in which Denji ends up with a bloody nose and in the garbage. In order to get back at Aki for the trash talk, he hits him exclusively in the nuts, which is hilarious. I can't stress enough how funny and cool this introduction was, especially as an anime only, which I was for a few good years before I decided to read the manga. It was an uproar, and people made tons of videos reacting, commentating, dubbing, and so much more because this was absolute gold. Aki is one of those serious characters. You know the ones. The ones that brood and have a tragic backstory, and brood. And at first, it seemed like Aki was more or less the same. But at least he wasn't trying to do a certain thing. Dang. But there's a reason for this archetype is worth mentioning. Sasuke from Boruto is a very popular character, and even the title for this section would have you believe that he's the direct father of all edgy emo rival characters with questionable tendencies. But the real one is actually a blonde, and one that wears bright colors. You sure? Yep, it's the one, the only, Kurapika. Kurapika has been stated by someone somewhere to be the inspiration for Sasuke, and it makes sense. Kurapika is my favorite character from Hunter x Hunter, and he laid the groundwork for what many believe to be the greatest archetype ever. Or at least top 5. Kurapika is one of them, characters who started the hunger for revenge, the power that shortens your lifespan, and standing on some very dangerous business. What separates Aki from Kurapika is the sense of responsibility. Aki lost his entire family, including his brother, who he accidentally sent back inside at the wrong moment, and Kurapika's clan was murdered. They both set on a path to revenge, but Kurapika's is more individual. Not to say what happened to Aki wasn't individual, but it was a few deaths and millions across the globe. We can see the difference between them in the introduction to their backstories, immediately separating them. Kurapika is on a quest for revenge to kill a specific group of people for massacring his clan. But Aki is not the only character that had loved ones that were killed by the gun. But he isn't even close to the only character who even wants to kill the gun. I'm sure if Kurapika asked nicely, going to Killua would help him kill the Phantom Troop, but it isn't the same as with Aki's situation. Aki is mocked for having such a straightforward and destructive mindset towards killing the gun, which is largely responsible for how he fell so quickly on his journey. Every second Kurapika uses his special ability, it takes an hour off his life. But Aki, he didn't seem to get so good a deal as that one. Or even the Death Note Shinigami eyes. Aki uses his needle sword once, and he has 2 years left to live. Those are some brutal consequences, and there are 2 reasons it could be that short. One is The first use sucked the life out of him so fast he could have fainted, and the second is it wasn't his first time using it. The third and more boring one is that he didn't have that long to live either way, but I'm gonna ignore that. His destructive pursuit of what is considered a common enemy is absurd in the context that it wasn't just his family. It was a lot of people's families, and we could even meet more as the story continued, including his partner. He even had every reason to think like a jujutsu sorcerer and choose not to sacrifice himself totally so he could carry on the dreams of those who fell before him, but he doesn't. I don't want to stress before I go on that his reaction is somewhat common in his world, and you can't blame him for wanting to kill the gun himself. My point is that unlike Kurapika and Sasuke, Aki knows a lot of people who have been going through the exact same thing as him, but he still chooses the most self-destructive path. And the reason why is my favorite part. He has to. This has been stated a few times by many different characters and people, but he also says it like twice, so what's the big deal? The big deal is that it's the crux of his character. He can't live without his self-destructive purpose. He can't watch one of the things he so adamantly hates die in front of him because his guilt is so bad. He sent his brother into that house and immediately watched it get destroyed. His survival guilt is crazy intense, and he has loads of it. It wasn't just his brother or his parents, it was also everyone he met after that. I would have probably killed to get a panel or a scene of him crying over the friend he lost to Rize, but nevertheless, his main character trait that sets him apart from Sasuke and Kurapika is his guilt. Sasuke knows it wasn't his fault, and he doesn't focus on that. He focuses on becoming strong enough to kill Itachi. Kurapika doesn't feel like it's his fault, so he pours all his energy into killing the Phantom Troop. But Aki does feel like guilty. He pours as much energy into destroying himself as he does the gun. He chooses to make short choices to shorten his lifespan, which he definitely didn't have to do. You could argue that he did it to save his life in the short term, but that isn't the case. As far as we can see through the text, before he loses the fox, he doesn't even consider making stronger contracts like his partner Himeno did. With better contracts, he could do more damage, and he wouldn't even have to use the needle. The work is dangerous, yes, but carrying around a tool that sucks your lifespan on your back when you have other options is foolish. At least when you consider if it wasn't intentional. It was. His survival guilt caused him to make a lot of choices that he might not have made if he valued his own life. Saving the angel might have been heroic, but it might not have been as fatal if he hadn't squandered his life away first. The reason he states is even more telling of where his head is at when making these poor choices. It wasn't for altruistic reasons, it was just because he can't help from doing whatever he can to stop letting people die in front of him. The other thing that separates Aki from Kurapika and Sasuke is the temperament of his resolve. He has forged a life fueled by guilt and revenge, but when he is given something more to care about, unlike Sasuke and Kurapika, he chooses his friends. When Aki realizes how out of depth they are, and that he wants to save Denji and Power, he stops at nothing. He takes Division 4 out of the mission to find and kill the gun in order to save their lives. This is something a character like him would simply never do. The option is always there, tempting, but they choose their own destructive path of revenge every time, except Aki. Aki sets his revenge and burden aside in order to help his friends live another day. But unfortunately it didn't work, and Aki ended up right where he started. That is, until he learns the truth. In one of the coldest Makima reveals of all time, she tells Aki, Denji, and Power that the gun has already been defeated, but is in pieces across the world. Killing the gun isn't possible, and never was. This reminds me of when Kurapika thought that the Phantom Troop was dead, and then he had like a day to be happy, but instead of that, Aki didn't even get enough of a break to process much on screen. 'Cause the future rules, and is calling. Aki saw Denji kill Power and himself, and in an attempt to prevent this outcome, In one of the most WTF, where did that come from moments in the entire series, he asks Makima for help. When she reveals what she is, and then it's too late. Something terrible happens off screen, while an unsuspecting Denji and Power sleep in peace for potentially the last time. One of the most abhorrent things I've ever seen a character do happens off screen. Denji is warned to not open the door, but he doesn't listen, and he sees the gun fiend standing right in front of him. After a massive explosion, Power tells Denji that she's confused because it smelled like Aki was at their front door. He tells her to quit lying, but he soon realizes the truth. Aki had been turned into the gun fiend. I'm absolutely sure that this would have made Aki sick to his stomach. He was attacking those he loved, and he attacked them as the thing he hated more than he liked living. There was one tragic silver lining for Aki. It's that Aki didn't know what was happening. To him, he was back outside with his brother. It was a snowball fight, and he got to play with his best friends Denji and Power. This was luckily more traumatic for Denji, Power, and the reader, because this would have destroyed him. Denji defeats Aki, and then Denji contemplates whether or not he could have done anything else, but it's too late. Aki died, and there's no fixing that. It may seem strange to put the section about Himeno after Aki's death, but I do have my reasons. The main reason is that what Himeno had wanted throughout the whole time that she was with Aki was not to survive together, just live by herself, but for Aki not to die specifically. As I mentioned earlier, Aki cries. He cries for those he loses, and in public safety that isn't very common. After a while, you harden to the reality that your comrades die, but not Aki. Aki does cry, even if someone he barely knew died. He'd cry for them. Himeno gave herself up in order to protect him because she knew that if she died, he would cry for her. And he did. After Aki died, you might imagine that there would be no one left to cry for him, since it was the thing that made him special. But the most unlikely at the start of the story, the one you'd expect to get over like it was nothing, and the one that doesn't even have a human heart, Denji. Denji cried for Aki. It wasn't as much, and it was only for a moment, but Aki had someone cry for him. After all the tears he shed for others, I think that's amazing. The fact that Aki started out as some guy who beat on Denji in an alley and proceeded to be hit in the nut several times, it turned out to be an interesting, unique, loving, and tragic character. It's great. The one that cried for everyone, and had one person cry for him in return, Aki.